continue on with the concept of a percentile rank. The percentile rank of a data value, say data value x, indicates the percent of data values within the distribution less than or equal to the data value x. Okay, so for example, consider an SAT verbal score of 687 with a percentile rank of 90. This means that 90% of all students who took the test scored at or below 687, and 10% of the students scored higher than 687. Let me continue. Let me discuss this a little bit further. A lot of times you see percentile ranks is when you're dealing with child heights. Oftentimes when a child's height is measured, it's also associated with a percentile rank. So a tall child may be at the 90th percentile, which means that that child is taller than 90% of other children his or her age. A child whose height is at the 10th percentile would mean that that child is taller than only 10% of the children his or her age. So that would be a shorter child. You can also consider percentile ranks when dealing with people's weights or test scores like we see here with the SAT. We're always looking at, in a percentile rank, the percent of data values within the distribution less than or equal to the data value x. It's never greater than the data value x. So if you have, if a child is 48 inches and their height is at the 90th percentile for their age group, it would mean that 90% of other children his or her age have heights less than or equal to 48 inches. Okay, percentile versus percentile rank. They're very similar, but verbally they're used in different ways. We may say that exactly 62% of the students in a given school system received IQ scores less than or equal to 112. Okay, so it means that of all the students who took an IQ test, 62% had scores of 112 or less. So we say that 112 has a percentile rank of 62. We could also say that 112 is the 62nd percentile. Okay, another example would be, in a third grade class, 70% of students have heights less than or equal to 54 inches. Okay, so using the terminology, we say 54 has a percentile rank of 70. 54 is the 70th percentile. Okay, so it's easy to see some confusion here. This takes a little bit of practice. 54 has a percentile rank of 70. It's very easy to misinterpret which one represents the percent and which one represents the data value. 54 has a percentile rank of 50. 54 is the data value. 70 is the percent. Okay? When it's phrased this way, 54 is the 70th percentile, that's a little bit clearer. 54 is the data value and 70 is the percent. But just beware, if it's ever presented to you in this way, 54 has a percentile rank of 70, you have to recognize that 54 is the data value and 70 is the percent of data values within the distribution that had values less than or equal to 54. Okay, we can look at percentiles in terms of deciles. There are 9 deciles which divide the data set into tenths or 10 equal parts. So the 10th percentile is called the first decile. So if we say that a student's height is at the 10th percentile, we can also say the student's height is at the first decile. They mean the same thing. And we have this for all of the deciles. The 20th percentile is the second decile, the 30th percentile is the third decile, the 40th percentile is the 4th decile, the 50th percentile is the 5th decile. This is right in the center of the distribution. 50th percentile means 50% of the data values fall below whatever data value that is, and another 50% of the data values fall above it. The 60th percentile is the 6th decile, the 70th percentile is the 7th decile, the 80th percentile is the 8th decile, and the 90th percentile is the 9th decile. Okay, so when looking at the 10th percentile, you only are looking at 10% of the data values falling at or below the data value. The 90th percentile, 90% of the data values fall at or below that data value. Okay, we can also divide things up into quartiles. 3 quartiles divide the data set into quarters or 4 equal parts. We have the 25th percentile known as the first quartile. The 50th percentile is the second quartile. The 75th percentile is the third quartile. So we call the quartiles Q1, Q2, and Q3. Q1 meaning the 25th percentile, the first quartile, Q2 and Q3, the 75th percentile or the third quartile. Okay, if we look at the relationship between deciles and percentiles, we have this diagram, which should just demonstrate what I had talked about before. And with quartiles and percentiles, we have this diagram. Now, think of all the data values of a distribution listed from smallest to largest. Okay, from smallest to largest, always from left to right, smallest to largest. If there is a data value that is at the 90th percentile, it means that 90% of the other data values fall below it. Okay, and only 10% fall above it. If a data value is at the 30th percentile or the third decile, it means that only 30% of the data values fall below it, and 70% of the data values fall above it. Okay, and we can look at the quartiles and the percentiles in the same way. 25% of the data values fall below the data value at the 25th percentile, first quartile, whereas 75% of the data values fall below the data value at the third quartile or 75th percentile. Okay, let's look at an example to reinforce these concepts. Some results from the mathematics reasoning part of the Scholastic Aptitude Test, the SAT, are given in Table 3.20. Using the table, determine the score which is at the first decile. Okay, the first decile is the 10th percentile, so the score that we're referring to is 320. Now let's interpret that score. It means that 10% of the students had a score of 320 or less. 90% of the students had a score greater than 320. Okay, so 10% of the students had a score of 320 or less. Okay, so the answer here is 320. The median is the middlemost data value in which 50% of the data values fall below and 50% of the data values fall above. So the median, you can think of the median as the 50th percentile. Okay, the 50th percentile is the median. So that is 474. It means that 50% of the students had scores of 474 or less, and 50% of the students had scores greater than 474. Okay, so 474 is that score right in the center. The score which has a percentile rank of 90. So easy, you just go to the column for percentile, you look at the percentile 90, which is the percentile rank of 90. The score associated with that is 650. The interpretation of that would mean that 90% of the students had a score of 650 or less, where 10% of the students had a score more than 650. Okay, so the answer here is 650. The percentile rank of a score of 380. and state what quartile it represents. Well, the score 380 has a percentile rank of 25, meaning that 25% of the students had scores of 380 or less. That represents the first quartile. Okay, so PR is an abbreviation for percentile rank. It's the first quartile. 380 is the 25th percentile or the first quartile. The third quartile, also known as the 75th percentile, we go down to the 75th percentile. The score that represents the third quartile or the 75th percentile is 570, which means that 75% students had scores of 570 or less. Okay, the score, which is the 6th decile. 6th decile is the 60th percentile, which is a score of 510. Means that 60% of the students had scores of 510 or less. And that was that. Okay, so what you really have to understand is the concept of a percentile means the percent of data values that were at or below that particular score. Okay. The 5-number summary.